welcome to week 2 of English 101. So as promised, today we're going to be looking at or answering the question, why is a verb like James Dean? That's going to be part 1, and part 2 is going to be looking at a different question, which is when is a verb like Marty McFly? It's full of movie stars today. Before we get started, I'm going to talk about just 3 points that were brought up this week. First of all, somebody emailed in to say, to complain really about my sentence last week about football. Just to remind you, the question was, what do you do, Sarah, when football comes on the television? And my answer was, I sleep. So remember we were talking about this little block, and that was my example. I plus my verb sleep is I sleep. Someone had a problem with this. Football does not make people sleep. Apparently football is the beautiful game. Wait, we're not going to argue. Sonnet number 18 from Shakespeare is beautiful. Italian Vogue is beautiful. Art Deco is beautiful. Football, we can fight about that when we're back in class in Portadown, I think. The second question, a little bit more grammatical, was about the word therefore. So one of the sentences that we looked at last week was from René Descartes, which was, I think, therefore I am. And the question was, what does therefore mean? Well, let's have a little bit of a closer look at that sentence. What we saw last week was we had I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. What do you think the word therefore is doing? Basically what it's acting as, if we think of the two little pieces, I think and I am, as little blocks here, the therefore is holding them together. So you create a longer sentence, but within that sentence you've got two of these blocks, those kind of basic building blocks that we talked about last week. Now the word therefore is not a word that we would use naturally every day. It's kind of fancy, but it means the same as another word that you might use. So I'm going to give you an example of a more simple sentence. If I said, I forgot to eat my breakfast this morning, so I'm hungry. I forgot to eat my breakfast this morning contains this block, I forgot. I'm hungry. I am hungry. Another block. So the word so in that sentence is holding them together. We could also say, I forgot to eat my breakfast this morning, therefore I'm hungry. Now those two sentences, and you should see them up on the screen now, those two sentences actually mean pretty much the same. They're connecting those two ideas, forgetting to have breakfast and being hungry. The being hungry is like the result of this first part. So and therefore, we can see, are doing the same job. They're holding two parts of that sentence together. But what's the difference? So have a listen again. I'll read them out. We have, I forgot to have my breakfast this morning, so I'm hungry. I forgot to have my breakfast this morning, therefore I am hungry. So they mean, what we're saying is they mean more or less the same thing, but there is a little bit of a difference. You can probably hear the first one might be something similar to what you'd say. The second one is less likely, it's less common, and that's because it's more formal. And that doesn't make a huge amount of difference to the meaning of the sentence, but it would make a difference depending on who your audience is. And it's all about who you're speaking to, who is listening to you. So if you wanted to sound terribly grand and fancy, you might use therefore. And if you were just talking as you would every day, you would probably use so. So that's about audience and something called register. We're not going to worry too much about that. But what we can take away from that is that therefore is a fancy way of connecting parts of a sentence together in the same way that words like so do. And there are lots of other connecting words in English that we'll meet as we go along, and I'll point those out to you. So that's the answer to that question. The third thing that we kind of brought up last week was this American author called Walt Whitman, and part of your homework was to find out who Walt Whitman was. So hopefully if you had a look you would have found out that he was a very famous American writer. He wrote there's fantastic quotes, even if you go into Google and click on images and Google his name, you'll find some lovely quotes that he came up with. And again, one of my favourites, which I found during the week, and which I think kind of really, I think it was a kind of nice idea, nice image to have, was this quote, which again you should be able to see along with the picture, which was, "Happiness not in another place, but this place, not for another hour, but this hour." I thought that was kind of nice, and I suppose what that makes me think about is, at the minute I'm in my kitchen, the sun's outside, I'm filming, at this particular moment, talking about grammar, I'm happy. So it's not for another place. I don't have to worry about whether I'll be happy in half an hour. At this moment in time, I'm very happy. So in this place, in my kitchen, and at this hour, I'm happy, and that really is all that's important right now. So it's just that idea of kind of being in the moment, which I thought was quite nice. It's one of my favourite quotes from him, but I'm sure you'll find there are lots and lots of other really lovely quotes that you can find on the internet. Okay. Alright, so the question that we're going to look at today was, of course, how is a verb like James Dean? And this is really about what verbs do when you change the person, and also we'll see a little later other times that they might change as well, no pun intended. So what we looked at last week were different verbs and how they change depending on whether you're talking about I. So one of the sentences that we saw last week, for example, was I live. That would be I live in Newry, remember? And we said that if you were going to change this first person, so this is a new sentence, change this first person, the verb would need to change too, and you have this S sound that needs to be added. So you can see that here, it depends on who is at the beginning of your sentence. Now for most verbs in English, we said they all follow a similar pattern. If you're talking about he or she or it, they have this S sound. So we had last week, I live, he lives, I breathe, he breathes, and what was the other one? Oh yes, I work, he works. So for all of those verbs, what you can see is you've got this S sound added on, and that is for he and she and it, the S pattern. So that's a huge group of verbs, Other examples might be start. For example, I start, he starts, work at 3 o'clock, whatever it is. Smoke, I smoke, he smokes. I drive, he drives. I play, he plays. So for all of those verbs and many others in English, they're following the same pattern. That means that they are regular. They all do the same sort of thing when the person changes, and that's a good thing because we can kind of we know what to expect from these verbs. Now unfortunately there are also a set of verbs which do not play by these rules. They basically do whatever they want. They change in different ways. So these verbs that we're going to look at next are not regular. They're kind of like the James Dean of the verb world. Now, of course, the famous saying about James Dean is that he was, rebel without a cause. I think we're getting too deep into grammar if we try and think about whether verbs have causes or not. But what we can say is that they are quite rebellious. They're doing something very different. Now, one of the verbs that I showed you last week, and that I kind of missed out from explaining in last week's class when we were thinking about he, she, and it for a very good reason, was this. We had the sentence, I am happy. Now, most of you, I'm sure you're thinking at home, well, I am happy, if we want to change that into a he or a she or an it sentence, it's very simple. And what that would look like is, he is happy. Now, hopefully what you can see now is that whereas a moment ago we were looking at just adding an S sound or just adding an S most of the time at the end of your verb, now what's happened with this one is that we've changed from I am to he is. It's a completely different word. It's changed a lot, and it doesn't just change for he and she and it. This, of course, is one of the most important verbs in the English language. It's the king of verbs, the Shakespeare of verbs, and it is the verb to be. Hopefully you can tell why I sometimes refer to this as the Shakespeare of verbs, because it is to be or not. You can finish it. So the verb to be is very, very important. It's usually important for every level of English. It's one of those verbs that turns up in very simple grammar, but also in very complex grammar as well, for building really complicated, advanced grammatical structures. We're not going to do that today, obviously, but the point is that the verb to be is very important in English, but it's also a bit of a rebel. So it kind of does whatever it wants. This is the James Dean, one of the James Deans of the English language. So let's have a look just to see what happens if we take the verb to be and we change it for all people. So I'm just going to take this away here to make it a little bit easier to see. So what you should be able to see on your screen now is we have I am happy. So remember, that's our subject-verb structure. It's going to be, and I'm sure you can fill these in, it's going to be you are happy, he is happy, she is happy, it is happy, we are happy, they are happy. Now you can see that the verb to be, it doesn't just change for he, she and it, it's changing for lots of different people and things and lots of different subjects in the sentence. And what that means is you need to be really careful about using it. Okay. Now another example of a verb, so let's get rid of the verb to be completely. Another example of James Dean of what we would call an irregular. So the James Dean of verbs, these are also called irregular verbs because they do whatever they want. Another very important one would be the verb to have. Now again, using the verb to have in order to structure a sentence. I have, you have, he has. So instead of just adding an S at the end of that verb, I have, he haves, that doesn't work. What happens is we're using a different word altogether. I'd still get an S sound, but it's not the same. It's not just as simple as those other regular verbs were. So again, the verb to have is going to be one that you need to be careful with he, she and it. It's not just add an S, it's changed to the word has. Then we go to we have, they have. Okay, so the verb to have and the verb to be will be two irregular verbs. Remember, those are the ones that are rebels. They're doing their own thing. They're changing in their own way. And that's simply where we are now is the present. This is a very simple present tense that we're talking about. Okay, so we haven't gone anywhere else yet. Okay.